థ్యాంక్ యూ. స్టార్ట్ చేస్తుందా?
స్టార్ట్ చేశాను.
థ్యాంక్ యూ. మీ బ్యాంక్ వాళ్ళకి ఆప్షన్ అని చెప్పాను, రిపీట్ క్లాస్ వస్తుంది కదా సీనియర్స్కి. ఉన్నవాళ్ళు చూన్ చేయాలని లేకపోతే నేను చేస్తాను. హర్షిత వచ్చింది. ఇది రోజు నెంబర్ అమ్మా, ఎండింగ్ విత్ 982. ప్రియాంక వాళ్ళకి తెలుసా? వాళ్ళ క్లాస్ ఉందని తెలుసా? ప్రియాంక వచ్చింది. ప్రియాంక నెంబర్ కావాలి ఇంకెవరు? శృతిగా. మీరు మీతో కలిపి ఇద్దరు వెళ్ళిపోయారు కదమ్మా. ఇద్దరు వెళ్ళిపోయారు కూడా 80 ఉంటారు కదా. మీరు ఎవరైనా వెళ్ళిపోయేవాళ్ళు అన్నారా? అంటే లైక్ సిలిండర్ పక్కన మీకు కనిపించిన దాంతో పండుగ 8లో ముగ్గురు వచ్చారు కదా. హర్షిత, శృతి, నువ్వు, అనుష. అంటే ఇంకొకటి మెయిన్లీ మీ బ్యాచ్ కదా, ఒక 5గురైనా వచ్చింటే స్టార్ట్ చేస్తాను. ఇంకొకటి వాళ్ళకి మీ బ్యాచ్లో 8 మంది నడిచారు. ఇద్దరు వెళ్ళిపోయారు కదా. 8లో 4 ముగ్గురు వెళ్ళిపోయారు. 7 ఆ అమ్మాయి ఎక్కడన్నా తెలియదా? నువ్వు ఎక్కడన్నా మెడిసిటీ వెళ్తున్నా? నువ్వు ఇంకొక అమ్మాయి ఎవరు మెడిసిటీ? స్టార్ట్ చేసేద్దామా? ఇంకా రాసుకోవచ్చు. ఆన్లైన్ స్టార్ట్ చేస్తామండి. Good morning everyone. For seniors it is a repeat class, but usually I keep saying a few sentences which could be useful to you when you write about the history of anesthesia, etc. So it's not a waste of time. If you don't have any other important things to do, you can listen. Otherwise, it's a choice. You can stay or you can leave. This is particularly for the juniors, and I welcome all the juniors. I remember a few names. Harshita and Bhargavi is here, Shruti, and a few others. Yeah. So a few others. So I would personally would have liked to see your faces and your response, but unfortunately, even for the first class, I'm not able to talk to you directly. Anyway, let's take the best out of all these adversities. Okay, now today we'll be speaking about a brief history of anesthesia. So many of you may be having a doubt, why this history geography business? So we always, why should we study the history of anesthesia? See, an understanding of our past guides our future. So this is the most important. When you look back, you know how to go ahead in your profession. And the history of surgery is inextricably linked to the development of appropriate anesthetic techniques, and so the history of surgery follows the history of anesthesia. So I repeat, the history of surgery follows the history of anesthesia. The simple examples I will tell you. So previously, when chest injuries, chest used to be open, the lung used to collapse. So the surgeons there, the management is mostly a medical management of a pneumothorax, etc. The people were not aware of this. So there is still a lot of mortality. So then we realized the importance of the collapse of the lungs, and when the lungs are open to the atmospheric pressure, how it collapses, the negative intrapleural pressures, all these things we have researched and recognized. Then the surgery became very simple. Today, pneumothorax, you are not scared. You put a chest tube, you drain, and the lungs will expand in due course. So the surgery, and similarly, when it comes to neurosurgery, when you all go for a neuro anesthesia, you will realize the brain will bulge if the anesthetic technique is not good. Like you are little lazy or sleepy and you are manually ventilating with your hands, your muscles are tired or your thoughts are going somewhere, the brain will start bulging. The surgeon is yelling from the other side. So you can make their lives terrible by not giving proper anesthesia, but that's not what we advise you to do. Yes. So why I am trying to tell you is that yes, simple permissive hyperventilation would reduce the intracranial hypertension, and cerebral perfusion pressure will increase. So in other words, it's a question of life and death for the patient. If we don't know, we don't realize what we should do, we would be killing the patient. So I'm telling you I gave you only two examples where your knowledge, your skills will help you, and the surgery has progressed. Neurosurgery has progressed because of the development and research in anesthesia, and similarly the cardiac people also advanced because of anesthesia. The valve replacement, when we are stopping the heart, we give cardioplegia solution to arrest the heart. We cause iatrogenic cardiac arrest so that the valve is replaced, and so many other issues are there. So it is very, very important that we study about the history of anesthesia, how our ancestors struggled. It was not a rosy picture, they were full of thorns. People did not know exactly what exactly they should do. Just to go back a little, anesthesia is rated as one of the greatest discoveries of our generation, actually of human life. I am not saying this. In one of the BBC, that is British Broadcasting Corporation surveys, it was shown that the anesthesia has been rated by many people in the voting as one of the greatest discoveries. Because see, most of the people, they are not afraid of death or anything happening, but people are afraid of suffering, the pain. Pain is the single most important cause for which a patient comes to the hospital, and we should all be very proud that we are able to alleviate patient from the pain. Actually, someone said very, very truly that when anesthesia fails, the patient starts feeling the surgery. isn't it? If everything is fine, they don't realize the importance of anesthesia. But when the anesthesia fails, your spinal is not working or your general anesthesia is improper, patient has some awareness, he remembers what all happened, he feels the pain during surgery, then they realize the importance of anesthesia. So when anesthesia fails, the patients start feeling the surgery. So these are all the important things why we should learn. There are so many people who have contributed. Actually, if you look at the history, there were so many things which were discovered several centuries before or decades before, but people did not realize the importance of that particular drug or a technique, which subsequently was made available to all the patients. So to repeat, yes, the development of appropriate anesthetic techniques has made the surgery easy and useful. We are all part of it, probably. Yes, probably we can say that. So this is a picture of this. You will be seeing more often in future. So this is the first demonstration of anesthesia in public. So see, in science, what is not documented is not done, whether it's your case sheet or whether it's your scientific work. Although we do credit William Thomas Green Martin for administering anesthesia. In fact, there is one more gentleman, Crawford Long, who administered 4 years earlier. So we'll come to those dates a little later. Then I will tell you what you should be expected to remember from the history of anesthesia. See, actually, history of anesthesia is very interesting in the sense, I've seen the other specialty people, they don't read that much about history like we do, because every step was complicated and every step, people had humiliation, people have adored, and all these things happened, and finally, it is a sophisticated and scientific branch. Till 1846 or 42, you can say, 46 officially we celebrate, 1846, April 16th. Anesthesia was not an independent specialty. Even later also, till 1940s, it was part of surgery only. In Royal College or in US also, it was part of surgery. It was only as an extension of surgery that our scientific organizations were there. Later, we branched out and anesthesia became a separate specialty. In other words, we are one of the youngest of medical specialties. And briefly, how do you divide the history of anesthesia? Pre-1846, that is, before the public demonstration, there was only foundations of anesthesia. We will come to that, what do we mean by that. Then from 1846 to 1900, establishment of anesthesia. People started accepting it. Although in 1846, the first time it was administered, it was not all that easy that people would accept and next day they start administering anesthesia. So it took quite some time. Then in 20th century, we consolidated because there was there was the industrial revolution, then there were wars. Wars have taught us so many things as far as the patient care is concerned. And then in 21st century, the future of anesthesia in space and in other places, and so many robotic surgeries and so many things are there. This is all a future. So before 1846, between 1846 to 1900, and in 20th century, and finally in 21st century, the future. Pre-1846, the foundations of anesthesia. See, in Bible it is said, so the Lord God caused him to fall into a deep sleep. While the man was sleeping, the Lord God took out one of his ribs, and he closed up the opening that was in his side. So this is from Bible. So the God also appears to have administered anesthesia because he closed after removing the rib, and so the woman has always been a side issue. So from one of the bones. Now if I say that, you would call me racist or something like that, but I am just quoting from Bible. So this is Genesis, Bible. And what are the foundations of anesthesia? Human civilization is thousands and thousands of years old. The oldest civilization, human civilization known, is called Sumerian civilization. It's about 6,000 years old. our Indus civilization or Egyptian, all these things are 3000, 4000 maximum like that. But Sumerian is the oldest. That is now what we call as Iraq. Those days they used to call it as Mesopotamia, and it was between two rivers of Tigris and Euphrates that there was civilization. So what were they using? The Arabs, the Chinese, and Assyrians, and so many people were there. They were using many decoctions and concoctions to produce some kind of sleep and give pain relief. The alcohol was the most widely used one among the drugs. Then opium poppy, the vapors or sometimes the decoction, all these things were used. Papaver somniferum. Then hyoscine, it's also called mandrake. And cannabis. In Indian medicine, old medicine, cannabis was the one which was most widely used. And then cocaine, the new word. And what were the non-drug methods? They used to apply cold. It's called refrigeration anesthesia. Like you apply very severe cold, the nerve conduction temporarily stops. But again, when we were students, there used to be a lot of talk about this one. Ice block they used to keep for amputation, quick amputation, and then they used to produce concussions. In movies, you must have seen somebody hits on the head, the fellow becomes unconscious like that. They're more for fun. And then yes, it was people were doing that. So measured blow on the head is to produce concussion. Then bilateral carotid compression. Even today, it's one of the dangers we describe. It's not practiced now, but when you compress the carotids, the blood supply to the brain goes and the fellow becomes unconscious. So for short procedures like giving an abscess drainage or extracting tooth, they were using these techniques. Then the nerve compression. You apply pressure on the nerves. It stops conducting. Then hypnosis, acupuncture, bloodletting. Some people had crazy idea that you let out the blade. What actually they were doing was they were producing severe hypertension. In severe hypertension, you become unconscious, isn't it? So these were the crude techniques that were used. So now just let me tell 1 or 2 minutes about the surgery. Surgery was as a last resort, just to be one step before surgery those days. Mostly the barbers were doing the surgery those days. So surgery was not a what a very respected branch of medicine those days. Now it's different, but those days it was not well respected. It was a physician who used to dominate most of the medical practices. But the surgery, most people used to hate it, because even the surgeons, some of the surgeons have described that the patient is in severe agony and unconscious. Sometimes we do the quickest surgery was a few seconds, chop off the limb. So in some hospitals they used to ring a bell, and then thick doors used to be shut so that the noise is not heard outside, and the quickest surgery was amputation within a few seconds. The fellow, if he is lucky, would survive. So many of the surgeons, they wrote in their memos that many of them used to vomit, and they themselves used to become unconscious seeing all these things happening. So the busiest surgeon, those days, the one who had blood on his aprons and smoking with, because the tension, I feel, probably in retrospect. So those are the things that made surgery very unpleasant and not very likable. So it was just one step away from death. Only as a last resort that people would do surgery. Then the state of surgery, barbershop surgeon they used to call. Then types of surgery, amputations, dental extraction. We learned, in fact, as anesthesiologists, quite a lot. We owe so much to the dental surgeon through this. Anesthesia was not a separate specialty. It was the dental surgeons, particularly the US, that they did a lot of work on anesthetic technique. And then there was no antisepsis. Nobody knew about disinfections, etc. until very late, when Joseph Lister, talked about antisepsis, etc. And then the mortality was appalling. Many people, every second person probably used to die. And the indications were unbearable pain, the crippling deformity, and imminent death. Anyway, the fellow is going to die, why not take a chance? They used to do. So you see how they were holding up the patient and doing amputation. Then what changed? Industrial and scientific revolution. So it has brought so many things. One thing is, the research, the scientific methods, the discovery and the inventions of so many instruments, etc. The industrial and scientific revolution, the money, everything, it led to the progress. And briefly, 1540, the synthesis of ether. You can see that ether was discovered sometime in 1540, but only in 1846 that we used it. So in medicine, if you see particularly in medicine, you can see that there is a big gap between the discovery of something and the practical application. In 1628, circulation of blood, Harvey described it, William Harvey, and ether inhalation was suggested in 1744 by I think Humphrey Davy, but nobody, although he suggested, nobody used it. Then 1770s, carbon dioxide was discovered and followed by Joseph Priestley's discovery of oxygen and nitrous oxide. 71. In 72, I think nitrous oxide came, and people used to call it as laughing gas, particularly Sir Humphrey Davy, etc. They used to have parties, where they would inhale and have fun. So then the mesmerisms they used to call, and gas therapy in illness. So what do we mean by gas therapy? That administration of oxygen or nitrous oxide. These were all the things that were happening. You need not remember all these dates. I will tell you what are the dates that you should remember. First of all is oxygen. Yes, oxygen is very important. Who discovered it and when? That's important, right? Among this slide, the one thing you should remember is 1771 or 72. Some people discovered 72. It was Joseph Priestley who discovered, and I think Black or somebody in 1770 who discovered carbon dioxide. So the oxygen for source of energy or as a fuel, and carbon dioxide as end product of metabolism. Then the scientific revolution also led to late 1700s. Lots of new gases were identified. Attempts were to apply gas knowledge to medicine and directed at treatment of existing diseases rather than novel use. I mean, whatever was disease was there, you were using it, but not much research into new or novel things. What are the gases of importance, at least of those days? Nitrous oxide, ether, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. So let me just spend 1 minute on this. See why anesthesia is very important. Why we read about history, and see, anesthesia is still one of the branches. How the anesthetists act even today, even after nearly 180, 190 years, we still don't know how they act. So you see, on one side you have an inorganic gas like nitrous oxide, and you also have an inert gas like xenon, and you have complicated ethers and hydrocarbons. So all of them, but similarly produce the same effects. So anesthesia is still a mystery, wrapped in an enigma. So many theories have been coming and going, but we still don't know, only hypothesis. The most widely accepted one was of Overton and Mayer in 1899. In fact, there are 3 watershed events in the history of anesthesia. One thing is the discovery of modern anesthesia, the discovery and the public demonstration of ether as an anesthetic in 1846. Then in 1899, Overton and Mayer independently they put forward their theory saying that there is a lipid solubility in neuronal membranes that cause some perturbation and nerve conduction is affected, etc. That was a theory that was accepted very widely till 1980s. In 80s, the protein theory came into existence. Now we say that yes, the mode of action is same in the lipids only, but they finally act on the vital proteins, which will cause. So even today we still don't know. A few weeks back there was some theory which was upholding the theory of the protein theory. Am I right, Pravina? Yeah, Professor Sir has forwarded an article. So out of interest, I also read it. Yes, now they say that it's the proteins which are main important. Then so in between my talk, I'm just giving you a few important things, just for the because if you do so well in your examination, somebody could ask you, and have you read a recent article? Sir Humphrey Davy is one of the great British scientists. He became superintendent of a hospital. I don't remember which one, but yeah, he continued Priestley's and Beddoes' work, and we have about nitrous oxide and ether. He recognized the analgesic properties of nitrous oxide and christened it laughing gas. First tentatively suggested a use during the surgery. That's what. So Sir Humphrey Davy who first suggested nitrous oxide could be used as an anesthetic. So, quote, what he said was, quote, as nitrous oxide in its extensive operation appear capable of destroying the physical pain, It may be used with advantage during surgical operations in which no great effusion of blood takes place. So those days the terminology was different. Great effusion means hemorrhage. We are not expecting big blood loss, etc. It can be used. It's just gently suggested, but it was, I think, probably 60-70 years later that somebody actually demonstrated. So gas therapy in illness, the nitrous oxide and ether. Yeah. In 1800, of Davis' thesis, that became the footstep for others to follow. In 1834, Colton anesthetized 6 Red Indians by mistake. I think the bottle was something was open container. They became unconscious. But it was accidental. It was not intentional. In 1844, remember, this is one person we have to remember. Sometimes the question keeps coming in history of anesthesia. 1844, Horace Wells, who is a dentist, had his own tooth pulled under nitrous oxide. A new era in tooth pulling. Actually, what exactly happened was during one of those parties, somebody fell down and he did not feel the pain. He was not complaining of pain, although the injury was severe. Then Horace Wells thought, probably it can be used for dental extraction. In over-enthusiastically in 1845, Horace Wells he tried to demonstrate the use of nitrous oxide at Massachusetts General Hospital, Boston. But he failed because later the reasons were realized. Nitrous oxide is not a potent anesthetic. It may be analgesic, but it was not potent anesthetic. The difference is somebody falls unconscious and then he gets up. All these things with nitrous oxide, you only have pain relief, which was not adequate. So he was booed and people shouted saying that he's a big fraud or something like that. So this is one of the tragedies in anesthesia, that someone tried to tell the truth, but people did not realize it, but he was also branded as a fraud, and then he was booed out. He had to leave it. So why in anesthesia, some of the demonstrations have failed miserably. So because the choice of anesthetic, and those days, the vaporizers was not available. So we don't know what kind of percentage he has administered. So these were the reasons why Horace Wells was not successful. So actually those days there was I will tell you a little later. So he failed, Horace Wells. So along that particular day, even the next person, William Thomas Greenwater, was also there. So in between, ether was in 1818. It was Michael Faraday who described the narcotic effects of ether. Faraday, as you know, we had done a lot of work on electricity. We all know that. And then Benjamin Brodie in 1783 he was born in 1783. He demonstrated to Royal College of Surgeons that ether inhalation could induce insensibility in guinea pig. He had shown it on pigs, but it acted like a narcotic poison, he described. Unfortunately, he did not show it on human beings. So one of the reasons why anesthesia is very poorly understood even today is, I said, some molecules, they don't fit into configuration. Like when you talk about other groups of drugs in medicine, they all have a particular configuration. But anesthesia, as I said, inorganic gas or a inert gas, something like that, wide range of structures. Then another thing is, we don't have a proper animal which can be used in place of human beings. This was another problem. Then another thing is the very definition. Even today, people cannot define what is unconsciousness. The perception of a neurophysician is different, of ordinary human being is different. So many issues are there. Even today, we don't know what exactly you mean by unconsciousness. That is why when I talk about the theories of anesthesia, I will tell you, see, the anesthesia is not a single entity, like just loss of unconsciousness. It produces amnesia, it produces purposeful movements. The patient has analgesia, reversible unconsciousness, and then autonomic responses. They all are decreased to the minimum. These days, when you talk about an anesthetic, we consider all these things. We don't say that the patient is unconscious, so is anesthetized. That the patient may be, for example, if you give thiopentone, patient will sleep, but he is not fit for a surgery. It has to be supplemented with something else after thiopentone. So not simple loss of consciousness doesn't produce anesthesia. You should remember that. So this gentleman, Benjamin Brodie, he did it on a guinea pig. So it was not scientifically accepted. In 1842, first use of ether as clinical anesthetic was done. This was done by Crawford Long. Actually, this is one person. Sometimes it comes in again theory. So you have to remember a few sentences it is. In 1842, on March 30th, he has demonstrated. But unfortunately, he did not report, he did not document and publish the paper. That is why he is not credited. But William Thomas Green Martin was credited for administering first anesthetic in 1846. So Crawford Long, is a physician. Physician used to practice, and he used to do painless minor surgeries there. And then recently means a few decades back, the American government has acknowledged that he was the first one to administer, and a stamp was released in his favor. But for the benefit of those people who are interested in quizzes and all, American Physicians Day is celebrated on the 30th of March every year, in memory of Crawford Long, who has administered first anesthetic. But yes, let's go back to this important day, 16th October 1846. This you have to remember as long as you remain as an anesthetist. So this not only comes as a short note, but also every year we celebrate World Anesthesia Day, 16th October, not during this COVID times and all, but yes, we have all over the country we celebrate the World Anesthesia Day, we call it as 16th October 1840. It was the first time that public demonstration of ether anesthesia was given in Boston, Massachusetts. Even today, there is a ether dome. Those who go to Massachusetts, particularly anesthetists, they do visit it because it is now considered as a historical place. So remember this day. And William Thomas Green Martin. So on his tomb it is written, inventor and revealer of inhalational anesthesia, before whom in all time surgery was agony, by whom pain in surgery was averted and annulled, since whom science has control of pain. So now we have come to a stage where we say that suffering is sometimes inevitable. Suffering is inevitable. The pain is inevitable many times in surgery. The pain is inevitable, but the suffering is optional. You want to suffer, you suffer. But yes, labor pain, particularly the girls, I always emphasize, because the labor pain used to be considered as one of the most severe of all the pain. Now they can have a painless labor. So the suffering now is optional only. You want to suffer, you can still suffer, but there is an option of having pain relief. So now this is all thanks to William Thomas Green Martin, who first told us that yes, pain can be averted. So the surgeon was Warren. He famously said, I'll just go back, he famously said after the public demonstration that, gentlemen, this is no humbug. Previously, because all the public demonstration failed and people were branded as frauds, etc., so they used to say that they used to think that it is humbug. That means all made up and cooked up, etc. Now it's no more. It is no more. Surgeon Collins Warren said famously, this is one sentence which is very frequently quoted. Gentlemen, it's no humbug. So why no anesthesia till 1846? As I said, human civilization is thousands of years old, but why anesthesia was not there after 1846? So the reasons are many. Why did Davy not pursue his work? Davy was the one who first said nitrous oxide pain relief, and so many other people like Benjamin Brodie was there. No real concept of anesthesia in the late 1700s. Early 1800s, how can you achieve a state which you assume impossible or cannot envisage achieving? So you yourself don't know what exactly is unconscious. So how can you produce and define it? And then it called Pneumatic Institute, concerned with treatment of disease by the physicians. For them, the surgery did not have the same standing and therefore in place. They were prejudiced. They thought surgery is not a good specialty and it's not indicated in many situations. Then the state of surgery, almost inevitably it was fatal. Why encourage this one? So this was their perception. Why anesthesia was not there means because surgery was also considered very low. The general moral, religious beliefs and fear, the concerns about the animal experimentation. He is an interesting character, Henry Hill Hickman. Even now in Royal College, every year there is an award given by Henry Hickman lecture, and then followed by a medal in his name. He lived very short, 1800 to 1830. But he first time, he produced a paper believing what he thought was right. He worked on carbon dioxide. In between 1821 to 1824, a series of experiments on small animals to induce suspended animation. During that period, the animal is not moving and remaining immobile. Then what he used to cause was, he used to cause semi-asphyxiation due to air starvation. That is what we call as hypoxia, by breathing carbonic acid gas, they say. So this term is not used now. We call it as carbon dioxide. But when you talk about acid-base balance, we realize that from carbonic acid only CO2 comes. So it is a respiratory gas from which a carbonic acid forms combined with water. Anyway, that's a different issue. After unconsciousness was induced, Hickman operated on them, amputations, removal of ears and skin incision, and observed responses to surgery, evidence of pain, amount of bleeding, and the time to recovery. In 1824, he attempted to bring work to the notice of the Royal Society, and so you can see this paper. This is taken from the British Museum. These are all. This is he produced. In 1824, he moved to Shifnal, some place, and in 1824 he wrote a letter on suspended animation. Right. So then he knew somebody in the royal family to night. He published. This was a building where he did his work. So why I am telling why it important is, he used carbon dioxide. He produced carbon dioxide narcosis to produce unconsciousness. I don't know why that fellow chose carbon dioxide instead of nitrous oxide, etc. These are all even the most brilliant people. His paper was published actually in Lancet about the carbon dioxide, narcosis, and anesthesia. This was something interesting. So, but he lived very short. But even today, Royal College acknowledges him for his experiment, and there is a medal declared in his name. Between 1846 to 1900, again there was some big lull. So people have not vigorously used these techniques. Yellow anesthesia, ether was the first one to use. Then it spread to Europe by ship. Those days, there is no communication, isn't it? The post also has to go by ship only. By ship, Acadia it went. From Boston news, the news was carried physically in a ship to Europe, and they started using. So in December, same year, 1846, it was started in Europe also. Then the nitrous oxide was used. It came back again. They started using it. But in Britain, the chloroform became more popular. Two persons are credited with it. These two again, they are asked in the examination. James Young Simpson, who was an obstetrician, but John Snow was the first full-time practicing anesthesiologist, particularly obstetric anesthesiologist. You would know about him. I will show you some picture. And then the local anesthesia came, anesthetic without sleep. That is how they used to call. In fact, the anecdotal, they used to say that the surgeons would chew the leaves of cocoa, that is from where the cocaine came, and they would spit into the wound of a patient. So the saliva, with cocoa, it produced local anesthesia because of cocaine was used to dissolve like that. So these crude techniques were there. That's why probably surgeons were hated to do this. So there were many for local anesthetic. So many landmarks were there. You realize if you inject here, then slowly cocaine came. Cocaine came and they were injecting. This is the landmark. We inject here. This narcotic block like that. So this we have already discussed. These were all the people who were present on that day. Letter and other papers from Jacob Bigelow, the description of his daughter. Bigelow is, as you all probably should know, you must be known, he was a famous surgeon those days. His daughter had surgery under anesthesia, under ether anesthesia. So he complimented and he recommended, in fact. Along with a copy of Boston Daily Advertiser, that is a paper, it was sent to Francis Booth in London. The news was carried by Connaught Petrel steamer Acadia, leaving Boston on 3rd December and reached Liverpool on 16th December. So why I am telling you, this is an interesting day. The ship, it took, and immediately people started using it. In 1847, Liston, in addition, he became supporter of ether in the following months at a time when many surgeons tried, then abandoned its use, returning to practice without anesthesia. Again, people's mindset is like that, we have been doing like this, why we should change? So there is some inertia. The surgeons again went back to their own practice, but they were not using. What are the possible reasons for this abandonment? The one reason is the blame was on William Thomas Green Morton. He in fact had blamed somebody else, I will tell you. Attempts to patent anesthesia and so limit its use. What William Thomas Green Morton did was, he tried to patent and get more money. In fact, once his dental extraction started, he was a dentist. $1 or something used to charge and do the extractions. So it was a big money, but this fellow was more ambitious. He wanted to patent it. He saw more money in that than simple dental extraction. So when he claimed patency, the others could not use it. So then the anesthesia, all the people who did not have the expertise to give complete anesthesia. It was inadequate. So, and then secretions was a problem. Vomitings. Ether, as you know, produces severe vomiting. And then the risk of fire. They used to do many surgeries under gas lamps and candle lights. It was a big risk using diaphragm. And the cautery they used to call them. Then the perceived risks of rendering the patient unconsciousness for surgery. So they were afraid to make unconscious whether the patient will get up or not get up. So now why William Thomas Green, what was his complaint? So actually American Congress had announced those days $1 lakh to anybody who comes out with a pain relief during surgeries. So I don't know why these people, two people, I think it was Jackson, and he fought for several years climbing the money. So during their lifetime, it was not possible to, the Congress could not decide who they should give credit. So ultimately both of them died in poverty. So this was the reason why, if only they were smart, they could have shared 50,000 each, That's what we would have thought these days. So they were foolish enough and both of them died in poverty, but they did not share the money. So this was $1 lakh was a very substantial amount to be. So then these were the reasons why the surgeons gave up and they were not practicing. The patency problem, inadequate anesthesia, the secretions, explosions, etc. All these things. Then 1847, meanwhile what happened to Horace Wells? Horace Wells and Thomas Green Morton was actually together when the first demonstration was there. Then he published discovery of application of nitrous oxide and so many things he has done. And then Colton reintroduced nitrous oxide primarily for dental surgery. And then nitrous oxide cylinders became available. Ultimately, this tragic story of Horace Wells is, he became a psychiatric and then he had so many fights and ultimately he cut his femoral artery and died in poverty. He became a drug addict. He became a psychiatric patient. So that was a tragedy. Actually, if nitrous oxide demonstration had succeeded, you would have had a good name. Then they started using nitrous oxide for pain relief in labor, and the 1887 gas and oxygen machine, the crude form, was started. What we call as an anesthetic machine. Then chloroform is more of a British people were very fond of this one. Because of obvious advantages, I tell you. As I told you, Guthrie accidentally anesthetized herself and also 6 Red Indians, somebody like that. Anesthetic properties were recognized, and first clinical use was in 1847 in London. And James Young Simpson used chloroform for obstetric anesthesia. So whatever the advantage of chloroform is more pleasant, more sweet, and no problems of diathermy, etc. But one more interesting connection between chloroform and Hyderabad. So initially, then when the deaths were reported, probably the next slide it is there, I will show you. But he was William James Young Simpson. You can very easily recognize him. He's a very fat, big man. In the pictures, you can recognize him. He was a professor of midwifery. He tried chloroform on himself and friends on the suggestion of David Wedley, a chemist, and secured and popularized chloroform as clinical anesthesia, especially in obstetrics. So this is why James Young Simpson, what the problems he had was, the religious leaders used to think that the childbirth is a must for any lady. So again in Genesis, if I may quote, the religious and moral objections are quote. And the belief those days of these so-called pseudo-religious people was, the Lord God said to the woman, I will greatly increase your pain when you give birth. You will be in pain when you have children, and you will long for your husband, and he will rule over you. So these, we don't know in what context this sentence was there, but the religious leaders used to their advantage and they put objections. And then came John Snow. He had a regulating inhaler. He made a device. He was a full-time anesthetist, as I told you. And chloroform eclipses ether slowly because it was much easier, safer, no vomitings, no problems with explosions, etc. Then again in 1848, there was a tragedy of Hannah Greener. He was, I think, 14-15 years old girl who came for ingoing toenail repair, and unfortunately she died. It was the first anesthetic death, and it was reported, and investigations were conducted those days. So the first anesthetic death reported. Many people must have died, but this was reported. In 1848, John Snow on chloroform and other anesthetics, he wrote a book. So he is the one, you should remember. He became interested in anesthesia, although he was initially a practicing toxicologist. Apprenticed, so even let's leave all that, He was acknowledged as the first full-time anesthetist and developing ways to improve methods of ether and chloroform administration. So this is the picture of Queen Victoria, who at the birth of Prince Leopold, her 8th child in 1853, requested John Snow for labor pain relief. Yeah. Then again at the birth of Princess Beatrice 4 years later in 1857, and this helped to overcome religious and moral objections, because when the Queen has it, why not us? So slowly the religious objection was set aside because the royal family had accepted it. So one more important thing about John Snow was he was one who discovered about the cause of cholera epidemic in London. He attributed it to I think the water source, something like that, pump or something like that. He attributed it. Then from here I will be just brief, but this is the important thing about general anesthesia. 1884 cocaine came, then spinal anesthesia in 1885, accidentally by calming, and deliberately by August Baer in 1898. So you can see that August Baer. Then the infiltration anesthesia, so all these things came, What are the other landmarks? Lister introduced carbolic spray as an antiseptic, and then first endotracheal intubation, flexible brass 0.95 centimeters diameter one was used. See how much trouble they took. Initially, during much earlier that they used a reed and the telescope, you hollow it out, and through that blowing into the trachea was attempted. From then, now you have so many things. Recently we had a question on lasers also. So specialized tubes we are using, and so many developments were there. Then the first anesthetic charge, initially massage, this is I think Harvey Cushing has done it, and first time they started recording respiratory rate, pulse rate, PP, etc., and the amount of oxygen that is being given. So the charts came into play. Then what is in 20th century? The consolidation. Whereas the industrial revolution and sociological changes triggered the events which led in the 20th century, increasing prosperity. People wanted better medical facilities, the facilities increased, there was a lot of money and new discoveries. Then came the Second World War and the nuclear bombs. Now we use mostly the fluorinated chemistries. Fluorine is, I think, the most powerful of all the halogens and more stable compound. They are not metabolized in the body, it's a great advantage. And if they are purely halogenated, purely fluorinated, but if chlorine is there, some amount of metabolism would be there. So why this fluorinated chemistry came is because of the research in atomic bombs. Increased expectations, the transport and the modern warfare culminating in 2 world wars have driven both the science and specialty. The field hospitals, lumen tubes came, we want to anesthetize on one side only because the pneumonectomy is done on the opposite side. The blind and nasal intubation. Still, I will tell you, previously when we were all students, the red rubber tubes are used. Now we are using transparent polyvinyl tubes, and then what is called as laryngeal mask area. We will show all these things, don't worry, and we'll do our best. If don't get worried if you don't see them here or anything like that. We make arrangements, we will send you somewhere where you will learn all these things. If you learn good techniques and procedures, you will have a good future. So these are all the where the ether, all the volatile anesthetic agents are used. We call them as vaporizers, etc. So these things will show you little later when you come, the pictures, etc. Now we don't use them, but how the developments came and what are the problems with the previous vaporizers and what are the advantages you have now. So these are the things you will learn when you come for regular classes. One of the questions that is frequently asked in your examinations, in NEET or something, is whether anesthetic machine is an intermittent machine or continuous machine, the flow. So most people think that because we do bag ventilation, it is intermittent. No, it's a continuous flow machine. The intermittent machines are when the patient, because of the demand, they inhale more, like an Entonax. So patient is only intermittently that the patient breathes inside. So these are all the small differences. And then the breathing cycle. You might have seen when you entered the theatre, so as a host surgeon, as an internist. So the tube, it is not that simple. There's so many physics is involved in that. The patient should not rebreathe. They should not be resistant. They should be infection free. There should not be any hazards of explosion and pollution. All these issues will come. So they are all designed perfectly. One anesthesia machine, average machine, contains 2,000 components. So these are all highly sophisticated machines. So the blood gas apparatus. So in 1970s, Swan guns came. When we were still in school. So all these things have revolutionized. Now again, Swan gun catheter is, the indications have reduced now because we have too many gadgets which are non-invasive, like your tube echo, etc. So the indications are progressively decreasing. So we will talk about all these things: CVPN, arterial monitoring, ECG monitoring, and capnography, etc. Now we have microprocessor controlled monitoring equipment. It's this small change is there and immediately give response. Previously the response time used to be more. So these are all the modern developments. I am skipping all that. It is not, you need not know, but it's only interesting. Now the definition of balanced anesthesia came, then cyclopropane, thiopentone, they came and they have gone. So like that, But again, the curare and the muscle relaxants became very popular in 40s, and also initially the mortality also, because of residual paralysis, we did not have neuromuscular monitoring. Again, this question came recently. It came in your examination. The monitoring, etc., we did not have. So people also used to die in 40s and 50s. The deaths were more because of lack of knowledge about the muscle relaxants and the residual effects. Patient would go to the post-operative ward and there they will die because of the lack of proper monitoring. Then halogen came in 56, 64, Entonax came, I said oxygen and nitrous oxide 50%, and then new generation of ethers, N-fluorine, isofluorine, sevofluorine, etc. In 82, I think desfluorine came. In 93, sevofluorine came. So all these things, in 82, isofluorine came, and then in 92, desfluorine came, and the most widely used sevofluorine came in 1903, I think. So these are all the local anesthetics that are used now. Each one has advantages and disadvantages. And then the intensive care, briefly about intensive care. We had tank ventilators during polio epidemics, etc. And then ventilation for tetanus, poliomyelitis, etc. So all these things you will learn later, because the negative pressure ventilation, the concept is it mimics the natural respiration. The basic difference between natural respiration and intermittent positive pressure ventilation are totally diametrically opposite. So because of negative intrapleural pressure, we breathe in and breathe out. But when it comes to administration of anesthesia or ventilator mechanism, you are pushing air, you are pushing a positive pressure to inflate the lungs, like you inflate balloons. So this is the basic difference. I am going to take a class on intermittent positive pressure ventilation next few days. So then again, we are also into pain management. Many of our anesthetist colleagues, we have one more professor, Dr. Ramchandra Reddy. His main interest is pain management, and this is for chronic pain, it is anesthesiologists, who maintain the clinics and take care of chronic pains. And then this is Association of Indian Society of Anesthesiologists came in 1947. That's enough if you know. The future is, the target control. We have now issues of pollutions, etc., and the side effects of muscle relaxants, etc. So we have what we call is a target control infusion. Again, this came as a question recently. So we give a computerized model. We give and we administer the drug so that the patient remains at the same level of anesthesia and with much less toxicity. So these are all the issues, this would be good for the examination going people. So I would skip all this. The future of anesthesia is assured, but we may see our roles and how we practice is going to change. Many times, we may not be from this level to we will go to the other level. You can see that. It looks like Dr. Devendra, I think. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I know this is a bit only a kind of a motivational lecture that we must learn from the hardships our seniors face, and the availability of drugs was very less. Even when we were students, the intracath used to be, when I started my career, the IV cannulas used to be a great luxury. So we would use only for neurosurgery, major neurosurgery cases and cardiac cases or some major abdominal surgery. So otherwise, we used to maintain with needles only. So there were so many problems sometimes. The drugs were less, The patients' delayed recovery used to be more because most of them used to be excreted through the kidneys and we did not have the intermediate acting drugs like anticoagulants, Vecurone, etc. So the recovery would take very long time. The ventilators were not there. We have to manually ventilate till some late evening, late night, something like that, and then go home. So yes, we went through all difficult times. So we have our duty to pay tributes to our seniors who, with all their limitations, did a wonderful job. Okay, thank you very much. Hope you followed it a little bit. You have to remember about William Thomas Greenwater, the date 1846, April 16th, and Crawford Long, who did it 4 years early but didn't report, and then about James Young Simpson. The word anesthesia was coined by Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was an anatomist and also philosopher, something like that. He said a kind of indifference to the surroundings. So that is what he meant. So Oliver Wendell Holmes. So you should remember these names, important names, a few names. So because recently Goodell came as Goodell was one who invented the airways and so many other things he has done. So this theory came in theory and also in practicals. Also one of the externals was asking about that one. Okay, thank you for your time. I think it will prolong. Yeah. Okay, thank you. The next lecture I have two in mind. One is if I am ready with the intermittent positive pressurization, I will do it. Otherwise, I want to talk to the seniors about the bundles in anesthesia. What exactly are these bundles? The question is, recently it was there in sepsis. They have asked the bundles, ventilator assisted associated pneumonias. What is the bundles for? VAP they call it. So this kind of things you should finish now only. You should know from the beginning what exactly is meant by a bundle. Thank you very much for your time. And again, పెన్ డ్రైవ్ ఇచ్చేసాడా ఇచ్చాడా దీనికి ఉందా Okay, sir. Okay, please go here.